I have a really serious subject that I want to discuss. I haven't really found the words to talk about it. It's tough, but I'm coming out. Coming out, you guys. Coming out as a reluctant Jane Austen fan. I brought on Rosemary because I needed to discuss this issue with a professional, really. Somebody who's a professional on this subject, somebody who understands Jane Austen.
I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert. I would say definitely an enthusiast.
Okay.
But it's like I'll try and give you as much information as my own knowledge allows.
Okay. All right, hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, you are watching You Got It with Warrior Woman 91. Just for a little backstory before I get to Rosemary, I wanted to explain to the audience, for those of you who haven't been following me for very long, I've been a Jane Austen hater. I have crapped all over Jane Austen, mostly because of different experiences I've had with fans, for example, of Jane Austen. One instance in particular, which I will discuss at length later on, happened with two male feminists I met in college that were huge Jane Austen fans. And so that was a big turnoff to me. And then just various portrayals of characters of hers in the media, I've just been really turned off by. And so I've just kind of been an anti-Jane Austen person for a very, very long time. I've offended many people with what I've said. And then a couple months back, I was looking for audiobooks to listen to while I was like at work and stuff, and I kept having Pride and Prejudice come up in my suggestions, and I had I think it's Northanger Abbey also come up in my suggestions, and I was like, well, you know, I at least am familiar with the stories through Wishbone, and I need something to listen to right now. So I listened to Northanger Abbey, and I wasn't overly impressed, and then I listened to Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, towards the end, I was really getting into it. So I'm here confessing that the books are good. They're actually good. And so I wanted to bring Rosemary on because Rosemary is as a big fan, she's more of an expert on what the stories are and what the meanings behind the stories are. So thank you so much, Rosemary, for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
So basically what I wanted to talk about, what do you think, first of all, do you think my whole conversion story on this, do you think it's kind of the fault of the media and the portrayals of Jane Austen that I had these false impressions of her work? Because basically my ideas about it were that it was kind of, on the one hand, I thought it was kind of sexist because there certain portrayals that I had seen had made it seem like she was promoting women staying in the home and maintaining their place and maintaining like some sort of, I don't know, angelic attitude about things. And I didn't like that. And then on the other hand, you have other media portrayals that just gut the male characters and turn them into sappy male boy toys, women's fantasies personified basically. But do you think that it's the fault of the media for portraying her work inaccurately, or I guess, can you sympathize with my former position at all?
I definitely can. A lot of the work that I think was promoted, like that we look back on during that time, was like more the sentimental types of stories and then the gothic types of stories. And they're either like way too creepy or way too sappy. And when it comes to more modern media, yes, there is definitely a watering down of both the male and female characters, and that, like you said, it's like when you don't have that balance of like strong masculinity, you're like, what's the point? What's the actual framing for feminine women? And yeah, definitely with the way education is right now and the framing of what women should try and stay away from being the second half of the head of the household and for just being a baby maker and ordering servants around. Of course, that can be very monotonous for a modern woman today. And if it's framed that way, you could see why it's boring.
I want to tell you this story because this kind of gives a little bit more background. My only real involvement with Jane Austen as a kid was watching the version that I saw on Wishbone. And that was kind of my first understanding of these are the stories that you would find in the Jane Austen book. And so that, I think that's where I got the idea that, oh, it was promoting like women must stay in the home all the time, or women must have this perfect, friendly, agreeable, as they like to say, attitude all the time. And I don't think that the Wishbone version actually did those books justice. Even though I think very highly of Wishbone as a show. I think it's an incredibly educational show for kids. But then the other story I have to tell you is the two male feminists that I knew in college that were just. I'm having PTSD right now. I know they weren't gay because they would hit on me all the time. But one of the guys got up in my creative writing class in college and was reading his attempt at writing a Jane Austen-like set of paragraphs and talking about talking in these very not masculine, like very effeminate, shall we say, terms about women and about, and I was just, it just made my skin crawl. And I was like, if this is the kind of fanboy that these books create, then I don't want any part of this. And it just made me double down on why I thought that I hated Jane Austen so much. Mm-hmm. So, but that's just not the case. That's just not the way Jane Austen's novels really are. So could you explain to the audience kind of why are you a Jane Austen fan? What do you find the most compelling about those books?
I find that what Charles Dickens did for classes in England is what Jane Austen did with the sexes in England. And I'd say I feel like she rounded out her characters very similar to how Shakespeare did. It's like he had multiple male characters that were either the fools, the villains, and the heroes, and I feel like Jane Austen did the same thing with her female characters. You had the heroine, the villain, and then the people who were just kind of too airy or undereducated in order to really understand what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that balance of dynamic between characters is what made some, specifically Pride and Prejudice, a classic to always go back to. And that, again, I think that's something that is not portrayed well in modern media.
Mm-hmm. I think that it was a real disservice in the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, how they really downplayed Lydia's character, because her story arc is actually the reason I like the book so much, because it was at the point where, oh, Lydia's disappeared. Oh my gosh, she's gone for 2 weeks. We don't know where she is. She could have been raped. She could have been, because I didn't know I knew that the two main characters got married at the end, and that was literally all I knew. I didn't know about any of the scandal. I didn't know about any of it. She could be dead for all I knew. And so I was like panicking when she was lost, and I was like, where is she? Like, what? And she's got to run home. And it just, I guess I could relate to it, because I guess I've kind of had situations in my life, not exactly like that, obviously, but situations where, oh my gosh, we got to drop everything. We got to drive a long way. We got to do X. We got to do Y. We got to get this, figured out. We got to know what's going on. And so is in bed now. And so it was way more exciting. It was actually almost like an adventure for me. Like, oh, we got to find out what happened. And they just really, they took all of that out, and not the entire thing out, but they took most of that out of the media portrayal. And I don't know, that those are the things that make me more excited. And I'm not really much of a romance novel kind of a person, but I didn't feel like the romance was really, like, it was an overarching theme, but it didn't come into play into the book until, except in like pinpointed scenarios, and it actually made sense in the story. They weren't just like shoehorning, oh, and here's a sex scene here, and they're gonna make out over here. That's what I was expecting when I hear romance novel. I think 50 Shades of Grey. So, right. So Pride and Prejudice is currently my favorite of the Jane Austen books. What would your favorite be, and then why? I guess is it because of character? Is it because of story? What makes that book stand out to you more than the others?
I would definitely say that Sense and Sensibility is my number one. Mm-hmm. Eleanor Dashwood is, she's not as vivacious or lively as, say, Elizabeth Bennet, mm-hmm. but her standard of morality is like part of the tension of the story. Mm-hmm. The fact that she's clamping everything in, and you're like sitting there waiting for her to burst. You're mm-hmm. waiting for her enough pressure to happen to where she's like, forget it, I'm telling everyone I'm going to show all my feelings like right now. And then second to Sense and Sensibility, I'd probably have to say is Persuasion, and where you do see kind of that weird like narrative of feminism that we usually see right now. It's like, oh, you're too young, don't say yes right now, live your life, do your thing. And that type of decision actually caused a lot of pain for the main character. And the amazing part, then the height of it, is that you do get a second chance and you still get to be with the one you love. But Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion are definitely my favorites.
Now, those are two that I haven't read yet. I think I started Sense and Sensibility and then I got a little sidetracked, but I will end up coming back to it. I would like to read all of them, which again, it just kind of speaks to my 180 turnaround on these books, because I just, again, not a romantic novel, kind of a person, not, with all my preconceptions about Jane Austen books, I was not even going to touch any of these things. So the fact that I went out and bought Pride and Prejudice, and I now have a copy because it's good enough that I wanted it on my shelf. So I just think it's hilarious that after over 10 years of hating on these books, I've now come to the realization that this was actually really well written. And even though my only real criticism of Jane Austen that continues to this day is she is a little bit wordy, but I didn't have too much of a problem with it as long as the story was compelling. And I think that that's just kind of speaking a little bit more generally about story and what makes a good story. I just think it's really important that people who are writing these stories understand that you can't just rely on your political talking point, which is something that we see a lot of, Hollywood writers, they like to hide behind the political talking point or whatever messaging that they want to insert. They hide behind that and say, this is the story. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, no, it's not the story. You need to have a story. And then that story, expresses the message or tells, gives you an impression of that message that you're trying to convey to the audience. But you have to have a good story. You have to have compelling characters. So I guess what one of my follow-up questions to you would just be, what can modern day writers learn from Jane Austen's books regarding like plot and character? What can the takeaway be for people who are trying to write good stories but are looking at the modern day examples and thinking, well, there's not a lot here to like help me, like push me along? What would your advice be to somebody like that?
The simplest answer is tell the truth. It's like there has to be a very strong distinction between the sexes. And there does need to be examples of what a weak man looks like and what a strong man looks like without being immoral. And same thing for a woman. And I do think there needs to be examples of when a woman is conniving and when a woman is angelic. And again, it's like just tell the truth. That it's like there's nothing more entertaining than reality.
Yeah.
And reality has an amazing way of writing itself. And it is something that is lacking with some characters where they're either they're evil for no reason or they're good with no challenge. And neither one of those is accurate. And neither one of those is a good story to tell. But those would be aspects I would definitely say, if someone was writing, tell the truth.
Now, just to kind of piggyback right off of that, one of my biggest problems, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, was Darcy's portrayal. I thought was horrendous. I mean, maybe the actor's fine. I'm sure he's a good actor. I don't think it was his fault necessarily. I think it was the way that the director was telling him, you need to behave in this way. But they really, especially the ending, they just really reduced him to a sex object and nothing more. Like, maybe not quite that far, but it was he was just okay, and he is riding in on the white horse to save everything, and that's not really the way he comes across in the book. He didn't want anybody to know that he had done the good deed. He didn't want anybody to know. He had been very careful to hide it from everyone, that he had done, that he had paid off the guy that ran away with Elizabeth's sister. He didn't want anybody to know that. But then in this version, it was just like, I did everything for you, and I'm just here to serve at your beck and call. And I'm just like, barf. Oh, God, get away from me. I mean, and so I guess what I wanted to ask you really was, there's got to be a better way to portray men in the media, because I've never met a guy like that in my life. Not a real one, other than those male feminists in college. But they're not real men. They were something else. They came from some other place. But how can there be like a reasonable portrayal of men in the media nowadays when it just feels like there's this sick desire from a lot of women to just have like this slavish man, which I think men have a problem with that too, because you look at the porn industry, they're looking for a slavish woman. And so what can we do to change that, I guess, is my question that I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, well, definitely some of the other characters in these books. In Sense and Sensibility, Colonel Brandon is a highly respected, highly accomplished colonel, and he fixes everything. And it's not that he's at the beck and call of anyone. He's doing it genuinely out of the goodness of his own character. And he's soft spoken, but when he speaks, it's always something of value. That's very attractive. That always looks good on a dude. Good character always looks good on a dude. Even Mr. Knightley in Emma, where he is significantly older than the heroine, but he always tests people's character, or at least like checks them. Be like, badly done. Don't do that. Try not to do that one again.
Yeah.
And then even Edward, who's his son in Mansfield Park, where it gets to the point where he's like, I see all this bad nasty, and I'm just going to call it out right now. It's like, you talk down to my dad like he's a dog. You're going to try and spend my brother's money before he's dead. Who do you think you are? And there is a good way to write growth in the storylines, and it's like being able to hold that character even though it looks like it's going to waver, because I mean that naturally happens in any man's life, whether it's a woman he's trying to pursue, whether it's a business acquisition that he's trying to accomplish. It's like, go ahead and have his morality tested, but have him come out on top and have him be socially rewarded for it, because every man wants that. But he does have to be tested. That's how you're going to be able to find how dynamic a person actually is. He goes from that 2D to a 3D person that you'd be like, oh, I could see that in reality.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that we're both trying to advocate for is, please try to make things a little bit more realistic, because, well, I think the point we're all at is the suspension of disbelief has been broken, and it's just like we're at the point where a lot of these characters are just kind of cartoon characters, or like fantasy characters, as I keep saying. And so I guess that's just kind of wrapping up the whole discussion. Is I just would request from people who either are into romantic novels or into Jane Austen type novels, or even just into storytelling in general, as you say, make the characters realistic. And also, I think people need to have more respect for human beings, I guess, just in general, whether they're male or female. There's just not a lot of respect for human beings I'm seeing in a lot of media portrayals. And so oftentimes we see a lot of very stupid portrayals of people, or as we saw in Star Wars. I don't know how you felt about the Star Wars movies, but as we see in a lot of the new Star Wars movies, you get just characters just reduced to these tiny little factors of, this person is good, so therefore she has no flaws. This person is bad, so therefore he has every flaw. And or this person, we don't want him to be bad, so we're giving him zero motivations because we have to pull him over to the good side. We've reduced things to such simple, unattractive motivations and stories and characters. I just want people to have some respect for the human beings that they're putting into their pieces of media or their works of art, and just, you know, kind of have a better understanding of how people really work instead of just this kind of niche outlook on people. And you know, I'm just going to throw this out there. I want to make a lot of money, and I don't really care about making a good product. So do you have any like follow up to that?
Well, like you said, it's very niche, and I think the opposite of that is the story of redemption. And if you don't have someone fail and come back from a level of moral death or character death, it's like, you, again, like you said, it's like you have a 2D character who doesn't really exist in reality. But it's like you have to bring something back to life in order for it to be like, I can relate to that. And it's like, if I ever came up against a situation like that, it's like, I could go about it the way I've been, the way I've seen that either in a book or in a movie, and be like, I could do that and actually feel inspired to go beyond what your programming is in order to be a better person.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally fine to have some sort of actual moral message. I think that I'm not advocating for people not to put their politics in things or not to put any kind of morality inside. It's just important to not let those messaging elements, you know, come before the story. It's the story's just got to take more precedence over everything else. And I'm really glad to have had you on the show, Rosemary. It's been a good time talking to you. I think it's been a long time coming, quite frankly, because schedules just never seem to work out. But with quarantine, I'm like totally open right now. So maybe I'll be able to have you on again once I finish. It's Persuasion and Sense and Sensibility. So those are the two that I need to work on for the next episode. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Rosemary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelly. It's been a pleasure.
So for everybody else watching the show, please like this video, comment below what you thought, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell because you have to ring the bell, and I will talk to you guys on the next episode.